This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Welcome to the Japan on Film podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and today we are going to be discussing the movie Tomie, the 1998 film directed by Ataru Oikawa, based on the manga by Junji Ito. And joining me to discuss this is a new guest, and that is Adrian Abbott. Adrian, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Doing very good. Glad to have you on. This is a movie that I've had on the list for a while, and and we'll talk about my history with it. But it's one I've been interested to talk about for a bit. So I was glad to get your email to have you come on and talk about it. But before we jump too much into the movie, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
So I am a producer at Arrow Video. I work on lots of the YouTube content. Run a show called the Arrow Video Store, where we bring on like guests, critics, directors, actors to kind of like curate their own kind of movie marathons and talk about their personal connection to those things. Also produce video essays for their YouTube channel. And also, aside from that, I'm a director with my own production company called Another Motion Picture Company, where we, over the last couple of years, have created a variety of shorts and currently looking to make our debut feature.
Wow, very cool. So a few things I want to talk about in that. First off, Arrow Video. I mean, I remember them back when back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I think that's when a lot of us people of my generation, we really started to get into these Japanese movies, was because there were a lot of DVD distributors that were buying up all these Japanese films, releasing them overseas, and Arrow was one of those distributors that I remember getting a bunch of them from back in the day.
Yeah, Arrow is definitely part of that. Also, one of my memories from that time was like Tartan Asia Extreme, like that kind of, well, that sub label of Tartan, that label. I mean, there was like a whole boom at that period, wasn't it, where they were just like buying all these films. And I mean, just a few months ago, me and my brother found like a box of these old DVDs that we had of those films, and it's like a lot of those films aren't going to get re-releases. It's almost like lost media now, you know, these DVDs from that period. But yeah, Arrow and Tartan and labels like that were kind of responsible for pushing out so many of these, especially like J horror titles, you know. And I mean, I know for me, like Arrow were incredibly formative for my kind of like film education, especially, you know. I still have like my first Arrow DVD, like, you know, like Battle Royale. That was how I, you know, first watched that film, was on an Arrow release. And yeah.
Yeah, it was a real kind of flash in the pan moment, because I remember like at least every month, if not every week, you'd go down to the Best Buy or whatever, which is where I usually went, and on the new release wall, there'd always be something from like Arrow or Tartan Asian Extreme with some new, like, not all, mostly usually Japanese, but also as time went on, started having more stuff from like South Korea and Hong Kong in there as well, a little bit from mainland China, but I think and sometimes from Thailand. That's how I discovered the movie Shutter, was through that.
Yes,
And it was like, you know, this big glut they had going on there, and I think it was all because of the craze over The Ring, that everybody started to either want to remake J-horror or re-release J-horror in the West, and so it became this whole cottage industry, and then it was just like gone almost as quickly.
Yeah, from my understanding, I think like what happened was that, with the great success of Ring and then Ju-on, like The Grudge, basically there became this idea that, oh, if we just churn out these movies, it wasn't necessarily about creating like quality movies. It was about creating an IP that then could be sold to the Americans, and
Mhm.
then the remake could be made, and it just became, like, as you say, like this huge glut, like this huge push to just get as much of that stuff out there. And I think, like, one, the audience appetite for that kind of stuff started to fade. Two, the remakes, obviously very low quality. I mean, think about Pulse,
Mhm.
the remake of Pulse, not the
Right. Yeah,
phenomenal
yeah.
Kurosawa film. I mean, like, I actually haven't seen that adaptation, but I hear it is truly dreadful. One Missed
Well,
Call being another one.
here's an example of how dreadful it was. That Kristen Bell, who was in that, she even made fun of it in when she did the movie Forgetting Sarah Marshall. There's this whole scene where they make fun because she plays an actress in that movie.
Yeah.
There's this whole scene where they're making fun of this big screen debut. This movie was supposed to be her big screen debut, and they were talking about Pulse.
Yeah, amazing. That's so funny. I mean, so I guess the thing is like, if you just, from the American side and from the Japanese side, if you're just like pushing out loads and loads of subpar content, eventually the audience is just not going to accept it anymore, and then the market changes effectively. But I also, like, I think in some ways it's a shame because obviously I love those kind of films, you know.
Yeah.
I remember seeing Ring when I was like 14 and it terrifying me, and it still terrifies me. Less so now. I actually find it more sad, than anything else. But just, I have this visceral memory of being terrified of white noise, you know?
No, no, I totally agree. And yeah, it's that double-edged sword where yes, we understand the capitalist reasons why they were putting out this glut, and that was a bubble that was eventually going to pop. But at the same time, if you were getting into those movies, it was a golden age, man, because we
Hmm.
we didn't that was be this is before streaming. So that was, basically it was DVDs or it was nothing basically. So for us to be able to get all that content in such a short amount of time, I think that's why so many of us of that time period became so interested in these movies. Like the vast majority of the guests I have on the show are around, were around like, like you said, like 14 on the young side, all the way up to like maybe mid 20s on the old side during that glut. And I think
Hmm.
that's why, because that was so formative for our Japanese film education. And yeah, and it is sad that it just stopped because when I started doing this show, which was, about what, like, oh wow, like maybe 7 years ago now. Um, and I had originally started having like links to people where they could purchase the videos on Amazon. And what I found was every time I looked for it on the US Amazon site, since that's where most of the audience is based, is that the prices were like, $100 or something like that because they're all out of print. They didn't have
Yeah.
any new versions of them. The vast majority of these movies, you cannot find them on DVD anymore, which is sad.
I think, like I said, like it's almost becoming like lost media in terms of like English language, like subtitles, that kind of stuff, subtitled releases. And, unfortunately, I think that, I mean, it's fortunate on a national level, like a Japanese like domestic film industry is so strong that they're not reliant necessarily on international distribution. But then it's also, it can be disappointing because there's not just that desire to release, that kind of stuff. I mean, like, if you just look at the kind of exports from Korea, there's more and more of them year on year, I mean, I saw No Other Choice in IMAX, and I don't see that kind of like wide release Japanese cinema in the UK, at least, and I think that's a shame.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And and honestly, I don't advocate for piracy, but it's for some people, that's the only way you can get access to a lot of these movies. I mean, even when I rent these movies here in Japan, I usually have to download subtitles from somewhere else because even the Japanese releases, sometimes they don't even have subtitles in Japanese, let alone English.
Yeah, and then it becomes an accessibility thing. And like, to be
Mhm.
honest, like there are a few labels, Blu-ray labels, boutique labels, I should say. That's probably the better term for it. Who are doing Japanese releases? I mean, Third Window Films is probably the big one. Radiance is another one. Um, but also there's an accessibility issue with that as well, because who can um you know spend 30 quid, $30, every time they want to watch a movie, even if that is supporting the industry, you know the price point on these things is so high. um and yeah, once again, it's unfortunate that it's just not more freely accessible, to be honest, as a fan,
Yes,
speaking as a fan,
I
obviously.
agree. I agree. I agree. But let's talk a little bit about your film career then. Why don't you tell people a little bit about how you got involved in that?
So basically, I was actually studying journalism. When I just took, while I was at university, I took like a film module, and I ended up doing a whole year on Hammer horror films. The British Hammer horror films, and I don't know what it was about it. It was like the gothic horror stuff, but I just it became like an addiction. You know what I mean? And so suddenly I just kind of like changed tack. I no longer wanted to necessarily work in factual filmmaking, though I have as well for a long time. But there just became this desire to tell stories visually, basically. And I've been really lucky in that I have met some lovely people, because always with filmmaking, it's a collaborative medium, and it's getting harder and harder to do these things these days, especially as distribution methods become like more and more constrained and the money becomes less and less. You need to find like your tribe, basically. And I've just been very lucky in the last few years to kind of find those people and to be able to tell stories with them. And so, as I said, over the last few years, we've just been kind of like churning out short films, doing festivals internationally and kind of like building up a bit of a profile. And it was through that kind of work and also like the factual work, how I kind of ended up back at Arrow, basically, and working on their digital content, and which has also been an absolute dream, because obviously for me, also as a filmmaker, that opens the doors to just meet loads of cool people, you know? And yeah, I mean, that's basically it in a nutshell. But I think the best part about it is just you might not make loads of money, but you do get to play with toys every day, effectively.
No, I totally know what you're saying. I mean, I'm a novelist myself, and that's a very kind of solitary creative path. And I've been lucky in the recent years to also get with find some like-minded people in the publishing space, and I'm working on a book with a publisher right now, and it's like a very collaborative medium and area. Like the Slack is always active with a bunch of different writers chiming in with stuff. And yeah, and I've dabbled in film very, very briefly back when I was in university, and it was and that was the hardest thing, like just making short films with my friends and finding out which ones were actually dedicated to finishing stuff and which ones just wanted to goof off.
Yeah, yeah, it's
So
the people
yeah,
who show up as well.
yeah,
You know what
yeah.
I mean? Like people who show up, and like you say, you've got to finish. That is the
Mhm.
key thing. Think about all the people out there who have just like story ideas, want to write a book, dream of writing a book one day, dream of making a film one day, dream of playing in a band, and all of those people have the capabilities of doing that. I am not one of those people who think that like you were born with innate talent. Like
I
everything is
agree.
hard work. Um, if you watch like any filmmakers, like, or read any writers like early works, like a lot of them aren't going to be very good. Nobody
Mhm.
comes out the gate fully formed. I mean, even looking at like a Japanese filmmaker like Kiyoshi Kurosawa, like if you compare like The Guard from Underground or The Guard from Hell with like with Cure or Pulse, you know what I mean? Like, and I know that wasn't his debut film. I know he made like a few other films before then, but like there's a huge gulf
Mhm.
in quality and skill. And I love The Guard from Underground. Like I'm a big fan of that film, but objectively, Cure is a masterpiece, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
But the point being is like he had to make loads of low budget like V cinema stuff, and learn how to make things like quickly and cheaply and just practice his craft. And I think that is also something that people don't talk about in like creative endeavors, finding the people who are willing to just like put their heads down and work on stuff, and like what was it like Miyazaki who said like filmmaking is suffering,
Mhm.
can't believe I want to make another one. Like yeah, but you got to find the people who are willing to make another one and willing to suffer with you.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean that you're preaching the choir here. Like that whole idea, that myth of like the natural born artist is something that drives me crazy, as if art is this magical skill that is only bestowed on the chosen few. And I
Hmm.
tell I teach English in my day job, and I tell my students that, mastering a language, mastering art is just like mastering any other skill. And I ask them, like, how many of you have played sports? How many of you play an instrument? And some of them raise their hands, and I say, like, okay, so first time you got on the soccer field, were you able to, score a goal right away? First time you got up to bat, were you able to, hit a home run? And like, well, no, of course not. I'm like, first time you worked out, you weren't able to start bench pressing like, 100 kilos or whatever. You had to build up to it. First time you played a trumpet, it probably annoyed the crap out of your parents because it was just noise coming out. Like, these things take practice, it takes time, it takes effort. And it's the same thing with language. It's the same thing with art. Everybody, and I'm going to get on a bit of a soapbox here, but that's what annoys me about the so-called AI artists right
I
now
was
who
about
say,
to I was about to kind of go on to that tangent as well,
yeah,
by the way.
well, yeah, but they say that this has democratized art, and art has been gatekept for so long. I'm like, it's never been gatekept. The only gatekept, the only thing you need to make art is just, the only thing you need to draw is just need a paper and something to draw with, and then you just start. There's no gatekeeping involved. It's just you don't want to do the work is the
Hmm.
problem.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's this Argentinian film called Plaga Zombie Zona Mutante. Um, and I'm actually thinking of the second one that they made, but they made these films for absolutely no money at all, and they're brilliant. They're rough around the edges. They look kind of scrappy. They definitely aren't like these big budget things, but they just came together and they made it. And by the time they got to the third one, it looks like a movie. I mean, to be fair, by the time they made the second one, it looked like a movie. A crap movie. Well, I love it, but it looked a bit like it was shot on a potato. But the fact was, like, even with like those guys, you can like see their journey, and the fact is they loved it and they stuck with it and they enjoyed it. And like you say, like nobody's gatekeeping art, you just have to put in the effort, you know? And yeah, the AI art thing for me is just, but you see it, like I think I saw on like Reddit the other day, someone had posted like, oh, is there any kind of AI tool that makes up prompts for you? Because I've gotten bored of, coming up with prompts. And I was just thinking, and I just felt like, okay, I feel like a little bit less stressed about this so-called AI revolution because the people who are so like bought into it, they're going to get bored of, they can't even be bothered to write a sentence.
Oh my God, that is the funniest thing I've heard. I've also seen like people trying to like getting angry because other people are using their prompts, and just like this is it's just the lack of self-awareness it just kills me. But
I mean,
anyway,
you can't copyright a prompt. It's just like a short phrase, a short sentence. But also, um, I believe it's in America where um, AI art is still not
Yeah, it's
copyrighted, you know?
right. Because it wasn't created by a human. The courts have ruled, so it's automatically public domain. So yeah, there's that. Now how that's going to shake out over time in terms of like, well, how what happens if you alter it and all that. There's going to be a whole bunch of stuff to wrangle out of that over in the coming years, which is going to be really annoying. But
It's going to be really
uh,
annoying, but I think like a short to just to finish this bit off, I
mm,
just think like a short-term consequence of that at least is that these big corporations are going to focus their efforts on using this technology in like an internal sense, you know,
mhm.
build towards like internal data centers and like internal, data models and stuff like that. Where they have like these LLMs and this technology like trained on things that they own, and ultimately, that's better than wholesale theft. And
Mhm.
they
And
wanted to do that.
assuming the bubble doesn't pop in the meantime, which I think we're headed towards anyway.
Well,
Um,
the problem with that is it's terrible for all of us.
yeah, yeah. I mean, well, we're right on at the time we're recording this, right? The U.S. is going into a war with Iran, so which is on the verge of creating an energy crisis. So we'll see how that deals with AI data centers then. Uh, but anyway,
Well,
uh,
let's just talk about movies instead.
yeah, let's talk about something more pleasant, which is Japanese film. So you mentioned that you first discovered Ring when you were 14. So was that your introduction to Japanese cinema?
Well, so basically, I'm half Brazilian, and there's a large Japanese population in Brazil. So, there was a lot of Japanese media around. I didn't really understand what it was, but it was just like almost getting me used to that kind of stuff, like anime, manga, that kind of stuff. It was only when, because my dad was an engineer, so we moved around a lot, kind of like almost like a military kind of, where you move every couple of years or whatever. Um, though he wasn't in the military, it was like a consumer thing. But anyway, I digress. It was only when I got to the States where I was introduced to what was then called Japanimation, you know, pre-anime days, and flipped manga, because they were like, oh, Western audiences won't be able to understand the fact that it's you read it backwards, so flipped manga and Japanimation basically. And so yeah, I mean, really initially it was like the early kind of manga that was published. So obviously you've got like Akira and like Dragon Ball and stuff like that. um Akira also was just like phenomenal for me. There was something that I had on DVD. I watched it all the time. I just Otomo's like architectural background and the complexity of the animation and the art, and the manga is just like a masterpiece as well. The how he did it was insane. But if we're talking about like Japanese cinema itself, then yeah, it would have been Ring, and I was terrified.
So what was it about Ring that made you want to seek out more Japanese film?
I think there is a thing about Japanese cinema, like a lot of Japanese cinema, not just about Japanese horror, but like there's almost like in music, I guess you'd call it like an earworm. You know what I mean? It just like you can't get it out your head, you know? There's a Japanese horror film kind of from the same era as like Tomie and like and Ring and all that kind of stuff called St. John's Wort. And it looks awful, and it's very by the number. And by the reason why I say it looks awful is because it's shot on like early digital. You can't like remaster that. What you got was what you got. The same problem that George Lucas faces with the prequel trilogy for Star Wars. Where you can keep releasing remasters of the original film shot in 35, but what he shot in HD, back in the early 2000s, that's what you had. And St. John's Wort is a much cheaper film, so it looks terrible. The story is fairly compelling, but it's also a bit by the numbers, like vengeful ghost girl, like definitely riffing off of the things that made films like Ring and Ju-on like, successful. But I still can't get that film out my head. and like all these criticisms that I've given it, I can't stop thinking about it, and there's a lot of films like that, and like Shinya Tsukamoto is like Vital, which is just like this meditation on grief. I mean, it's unlike so much of the stuff that he did before it. Obviously, like Tetsuo the Iron Man, so frenetic and crazy. And then like by Vital, he's doing these slow meditations on grief, and it's just phenomenal. And he's doing it all at like such a low budget range. And there's a lot of that also within Japanese cinema, like these low budgets, quick production time. Just look at like the output of Takashi Miike, for example. I mean, like, I don't know if he really has made like 200 films or whatever number he's on. Like every time I look, there's like another 50. But there is something to be said about the fact that they're just going in and making it quickly, and I have like incredible amount of like respect for that. The fact that it is seen as like an industry, not just an art form, you can make art, but there is a structure that means that people can have livings, maybe not great livings. I'm not saying that people getting paid well and as terrible hours and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, like One Cut of the Dead, like parodies that, incredibly well as the semi sequel, the Hollywood edition, where they make the remake kind of
Oh,
thing.
I haven't seen that one.
Oh, it's sweet. It's obviously lightning never strikes twice, but basically, like, they want to make it in America with like some of the same crew, but like they run out of money and they have to make it in Japan and pretend that they're making it in America, and shenanigans ensue basically. Um, but I mean, like I love it. I do kind of love that like sequel, because it's just like they're overworked, they're underpaid, but like they're doing it for the love of the game, and I feel like you get so much of that, you know, um, through Japanese cinema. I mean, obviously, there's going to be things that are just like obvious cash grabs, and there's going to be cynical stuff, but the industry element of it means that people like Kiyoshi Kurosawa can exist, Shinya Tsukamoto can exist, Toyota can exist, all these people can exist, creating very distinctive works, and that's what attracts me to it effectively.
Yeah, and I think it's great that, because you see this happening in Hollywood, where the because of like the shrinking audio base and the shift to streaming more and more, you're starting to see that the the movies, there is so much more focus on the big budget tentpole stuff, and it's like we have to
Mm-hmm.
make them bigger and bigger and bigger, and invest all these monies into like 3 or 4 projects a year, and hope that they're gonna make enough money to carry us through the next year. And the kind of like mid-grade films, or like the low budget films, they're kind of getting squeezed out now as a result of that. And and I love big budget stuff, don't get me wrong, but I mean, I host another podcast all about superhero movies, so I love that stuff. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, it is also really cool to have these low budget, or lower budget things. And I think that what's cool about the Japanese industry, and I think part of it is maybe the fact that video stores still exist here, so they're able to keep a direct to video market alive. And so having stuff like, so you can have someone like, and like the kind of like VOD stuff that was very big in the 90s, which is how, Takashi Miike broke in, where it's just basically like, here's your budget, here's like the requisite number of whatever type of scenes and whatever genre. Like in the Pink films, there was like, you need to
Mm-hmm.
have like 3 sex scenes per 90-minute
Yeah.
movie or something like that. And it's like, other than that, go nuts, do whatever, just make sure it's on time and under budget. And they're like, okay, fine. So they just, and then that would give them time to just kind of like play jazz a little bit, as long as they met those, prerequisites. Everything else was kind of fair game. The suit would be like, all right, fine, you got the 3 sex scenes in, let's release it.
But it's like I guess like Bumpkin Soup is an example of that. And then another Kurosawa one where I can't remember what the title is, but it's like, I don't know, these Yakuza guys who like take over a taxi company, you know,
Mm.
and like there's just, there's a story there, and like you say, they're just like kind of they're doing their own thing, but they're like, okay, now here's the sex scene. And
Yeah.
that's also what's like sometimes can be like weird or off-putting for people who kind of don't know that history or not going in with an open mind. But it's kind of wonderful, you know? It's kind
Yeah.
of wonderful that that exists and that gave people the opportunity to experiment, you know?
No, I totally agree. Yeah, and it's yeah, it's great when we have those opportunities, and um hopefully that's going to continue. So, but anyway, we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we will dive into Tomie.
This episode is brought to you by Prime. What if you had one more chance with the one that got away?
Sam, you came home.
Based on the best-selling novel from Carly Fortune. Every year after follows childhood friends Sam and Percy as they reunite in the dreamy, nostalgic lakeside town of Barry's Bay.
Love can be hard to find. So if you're lucky enough to find that person, never let go.
A second chance at first love. Every year after, now streaming only on Prime.
LinkedIn is pretty amazing at helping you grow your small business. We cannot make your email response time faster. We can help you sell, market, and hire in one place. We cannot help you find space for your 3 desk drinks. Why do you have 3? And while we can't help you find the perfect volume for your presentation video, LinkedIn can help you find the perfect audience for your business. Grow your small business on LinkedIn. Learn more at linkedin.com/smallbusiness.
And we are back, and now we are going to start talking about Tomie. So this is a 1998 Japanese horror film directed by Ataru Oikawa. We have Mami Nakamura as the main character, Tsukiko, in this, and Miho Kano plays Tomie in this. We also have Yoriko Doguchi as the therapist who's treating Tsukiko, and Tomoro Taguchi as Harada, the detective who's investigating everything. Now, Tomie is based on a manga by Junji Ito, as I mentioned at the top, which started off in 1987, and it continued on through 2000. And one of the interesting things is that the movie is very different. I haven't read the manga. I have like a collection of all the Tomie stuff, but I haven't actually had a chance to dive into it yet. But one of the things about it is it uses a lot of body horror in it. So, and that's if you've ever looked at any of Junji Ito's art, that won't be a surprise. But so she can recover quickly from gruesome wounds. She can replicate herself by sprouting unnaturally from any part of her body, whether it be from severed limbs, organs, or even her spilled blood. And there's been a lot of research and criticism. And by criticism, I don't mean like negative things, but just like critiques about it, and like the use of the body horror in it. Whereas the film does not have any of that, really. We do know that, right, she can regrow from like just her head, but he admired the original manga, and he said the director, Oikawa, he said that it was a fairy tale in bad taste. But he didn't want to make a shocking and gory film. Instead, he wanted to make a film as not one where people scream with fear. I didn't imagine that kind of horror movie. I wanted this to be more like a drama for youth. And so he decided to and even despite that, though, he still had Ito's approval and input throughout the process. Now, what is your history with Tomie? Have you ever read the manga, or are you only familiar with the films? And I should add that this movie did end up going to spawn several sequels. There have been I think it was a total of 9 films.
9. There was 9 films, but interestingly, I think that an American company at the moment holds the rights, and that's why there's no more Japanese installments. I think there is desire to make it, but some contractual thing means that the IP is basically tied up into an American deal, probably because they wanted to make a remake, an American adaptation of it.
There was something that was being done. So Quibi, if anybody remembers that brief thing, Quibi in conjunction with Sony and Universal, they were going Alexander Aja was going to develop a web TV series adapting Tomie, And he had also, I just had this up here, but he had apparently cast Adeline Rudolph, who from My Adventure, the Chilling Adventures with Sabrina, she was cast as Tomie in that. And they're going to have Hiroki Shirota on board as co-producer, but once Quibi shut down, nobody knows what the hell is going on with that. So it hasn't been officially canceled, but it's just kind of like there, out there.
The thing is like obviously nobody used Quibi and it was a terrible idea, but when you were reading out that description, I was like Alexandra Aja, sorry, and was it Adeline Rudolph? Like, I mean, I would have watched that. I mean, it might have been terrible, but I would have watched that. I mean, didn't Aja do the Hills Have Eyes remake, which I think was one of the only like that was one of the only decent remakes from that era of like the American remake cycle, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Marcus Nispel's like Friday the 13th one and all that other kind of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of like Drek in there, and the Hills of Eyes at least was trying to say something, so I would have watched his remake of Tomie. I don't know whether I would have enjoyed it, but I would have watched it.
But yeah, I mean, he got to prominence from doing High Tension, which, I got some problems with the ultimate twist in that. It feels a little bit tacked on, but otherwise it was a pretty good movie throughout most of it. Piranha 3D, which was just hysterical. So,
yeah. I mean, it's strong talent behind that remake. So I'm gonna like stake a claim here and say that it's a shame that they didn't get to at least try it. At least then, I guess that the rights would have gone back to the original production company. I guess it was or the distributor, which would have been Daiei, which was then Kadokawa, I think.
Well, it was also Sony and Universal were also involved in it, so who knows how the rights split up with them? Who knows?
Yeah, an absolute mess, I'm sure.
Yeah. But anyway, so before that, so what was your history with Tomie? Have you read the manga, or is it just from the movies?
So yeah, no, it's actually just the first movie. I think I really love Tomie. I really love that film as part of, I guess, this early J horror era. I think Tomie is like this kind of vengeful female character. Like I think she's fascinating in a way that maybe Sadako or Kayako is like less fascinating. But like she ticks all those tropes of, like the long black hair, wearing white, like kind of like a semi-tragic backstory. But she's so much more complex as a character, She is the antagonist, but she's also a victim, and but like more explicitly, because obviously like Sadako from The Ring, is an antagonist but also a victim, but like you can clearly see how she was, abused, or in like I think it's a Ring Birthday, which is like plays out more like a drama where she takes a summer, in a theater troupe, and then
we covered that a few seasons ago.
Wild film, but in that like codified like even more explicitly how it was kind of unjust what had happened to her, whilst like Tomie is an unlikable character, like she is completely unlikable, but did she still deserve to get chopped up? And I think that's what makes her so fascinating, basically.
And I think a lot of that is on Miho Kano's portrayal of her. I think that she ends up giving a lot of personality to Tomie. And yeah, when you were comparing her to, like, I think Sadako's a good comparison because, putting Birthday aside, because that movie just felt like I still don't really know what they were thinking about that, where they're like, okay, so there's like two Sadakos or what, and so it was just, and it's like you invest all this effort into trying to give Sadako her personality, but you still want her to be the mysterious villain, so we got to have this weird twin situation, and I don't know, whatever.
They wanted to make a different film. That's what that was. They wanted to make
Yeah.
the first half, and then they had to tack on the ring stuff at the end, you know?
Yeah. If you just go to the Ring films, like Sadako has no personality. She's a presence. She's a force of nature. Whereas in Tomie, right, she does have a personality, right? You do see her. She has an agenda of some kind. It's not just, this ritual she has to go through. And that makes her more interesting to watch. And I was going back and forth about this because one of the interesting things about this film is how they spend so much in like the first half keeping Tomie's face away from the viewer, and they don't show it. And then when they finally do show it, well, it's just a Japanese woman. And it's not, I'm not going to say that Miho Kano is not attractive or anything like that, but it's the idea of everybody talking about, how gorgeous Tomie is and how irresistible she is. And honestly, I think I think Tsukiko is more attractive. Actually, I think Mami Nakamoto is actually more attractive than Miho Kano. So so when I see them come back and compared to each other, I'm thinking more Tsukiko is the one who's the more attractive one. But so what I'm saying is I was wondering if maybe they should have just kept us from seeing her face completely and maybe just show her eyes and the characteristic mole under her eye, maybe just some extreme close-ups of her smile or something like that. And I wonder if maybe that would have helped add to that mystery of her character. But at the same time, now I'm going to argue against myself because, like I just said, Kano gives a really good performance, and I feel like we would have missed some of that characterization if they didn't show her face throughout it.
I think what's interesting is the way that, like, building upon your point in terms of like when you see the face and she's just kind of like a normal Japanese woman kind of thing. When you see the way men interact with her, like the manager of Sesame House, right? When he's introducing the new member of staff and it's Tomie, and you've kind of got like the almost like comedic relief of these kind of idiot boys, who work in the kitchen kind of thing, and he's just like immediately hitting on her, right? And yeah, I know there's the lore of the fact that she's irresistible and attractive and everything, but especially in that scene I was just thinking, how many times have you seen that kind of thing play out where you go to a bar and the female bartender is just kind of nice to a guy and he's just like, I've got a shot, you know what I mean? And I just thought there's something in the subtext about that with Tomie, where like no matter where she goes, it's like men are projecting onto her, and trying to, she's irresistible simply because she is a woman. She is like representative of being like an object rather than an actual individual, and that plays out within like this cycle of violence that we see play out within the film, basically. But I do think it is kind of amazing how long they keep that reveal, that builds the tension so much, and to be honest, like I think because of Kano's like performance, that when they do reveal her and it's all like that kind of like red lighting and everything, like she looks deranged, and then when we get to that scene in the doctor's office, in Hasano's office, when they've killed the doctor and Yuichi is possessed by her allure, and she's just like sat there like with the head down and like smiling. I think that's one of the creepiest images ever committed to film, so like I think it works, but it's purely because of her performance. Like a lesser actress it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I'm arguing against myself, which is why conceptually I think the idea of not showing her face at all would help to add to that projection aspect, or that allure and all that. But at the same time, I do wonder if we would have gotten as much personality out of her character if we couldn't see Kano actually performing and her facial movements in that. So yeah, it's something I'm arguing against myself on, and I don't know which way I end up landing on it, one way or the other. Although I will say I wish, and I'm sure it's budgetary reasons, but I wish they had kept the eye color. Like if they just done something, like gave her some contacts or something, so that at least when they're doing these long shots, there's still something additionally unnerving about her, something supernatural. Yeah. So or even if because in the books her eyes are apparently silver, so if they'd done something like that too, I think that would have helped.
I will argue though that there is an uncanny feeling throughout the entirety of the film. Like the most populated the film is in that opening scene, where what's his face, oh yeah, Yamamoto is carrying the dismembered head of Tomie through like that busy Japanese street, and like someone bumps into him, and then he looks in, and like that one eyeball like peers out as that like opening shot, and then it goes to the titles. Like that's, other than scenes with the police officers, that's the most populated the entire film is.
Yeah.
And it feels like empty and uncanny and dreamlike, and then you never see her face, and she's kind of like, like shift, like they're moving through time almost like they're like in molasses, that kind of thing. And so I wonder, like, the eyes are a good like addition, but like would it have added that much more, to that entire kind of like atmosphere that they have managed to build on such a low budget,
Yeah, it's I'm not sure what kind of version you have, but I have just a regular DVD release back from the early 2000s, and I've this is one of those movies that I bought and I never actually watched until about a year ago. So don't even ask me how long I had this movie in my collection before I finally watched it, because I honestly I don't know, because this may have been one I bought when it first came out. It may have been one I bought at a recycle shop or something at some point over the years, but for whatever reason I just never really watched it until about a year ago. And I thought, because I'd put it off so long, and the kind of appeal of J horror has kind of faded over the years, I wasn't sure if I would really enjoy it as much, because there are still some movies in that genre that I still really like, but there are other ones that have kind of, they don't hold the same punch anymore if I'm watching it for the first time. But this one, I really dug it. Like it's not my favorite, but it is one that I really enjoyed, and I think that atmosphere you were talking about is a really big part of that. Oikawa does a really good job, and the version I have is not a very good quality. Like it's got a very kind of like muddy feel to like all of the visuals in it, so it can be kind of hard to see at times. But
I would like say that it does kind of have that like sallow yellow color that you would get from that era of cinema. I actually love it, in my office, in my little studio where I like film and stuff. I've got ND filters on the ceiling lights to like dim the lights, and it's made everything that yellow color. So when I invite people in, I'm like, welcome to the J horror room. Like welcome to my J horror banner. But the film, like I also find it kind of impressive that there's so much stuff done with natural lighting. But the trade-off of that is, yeah, some scenes are muddy and dark, and but I guess it comes back to the kind of the standard of filmmaking that was getting pushed at that time in the industry off of like the V cinema boom. Like if you look at, I don't know, like films from the 60s like Hausu or Kwaidan, or even if you like to the early 90s, like Hideko the Goblin, like Tsukamoto's studio picture after Tetsuo 2, I think. Like they're vibrant, like gorgeously photographed films, even though they're dealing with like really dark themes. But then by the time you had like I think Crime Hunter, Bullets of Rage in the 80s, and I think it was Toei that would like, oh, we can make a lot of money off of these cheap kind of like shitty looking films. And I mean, I think they're beautiful, but that's because I'm appreciating them for what they are. But that like pushed this whole look, into especially these kind of low budget J horror films. But I kind of love it. But yeah, the trade-off is sometimes you can't really see what's going on.
Yeah, but you're right. It does help add to that atmosphere, and I am glad actually that they ended up having that ultimate climactic scene on the boat dock outside, because that helps to give a little bit more lighting in that case. So that was good.
I
Yeah,
will say on that final scene, just quickly, the first time I ever watched Tomie, and they both start like chuckling with each other, I was like, don't end now, or maybe do, because this is insane.
I was thinking the same thing when I was rewatching it last night, because I'm like, wait, is this where it ends? And I'm like, I feel like there's something else. Then I saw the flare, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's right. It started coming back to me. But that would have been an interesting spot to end as well. Although I do like the way they ended it with Tsukiko looking in the mirror and then seeing the mole. I don't think we needed the last shot of Tomie there. I think just having the mole would have been a good spot to end on, but that's just, that's a personal thing.
I will like also say that when I hadn't watched Tomie for a couple of years, and then I put it on a while back, and when that final shot of when she like enters frame, I was scared. Like, just because I remembered everything up until that point, but I just forgot that last and it's not even like a jump scare. There's no sting, there's no music. She just appears, and I was like, oh my God.
There's also something interesting they did with the overall depiction of Tomie, because in the manga, she's apparently a lot more sexually aggressive. Whereas here, that is more suggested as opposed to outright stated. Like she's wearing very conservative clothes, right? She's always in this like white blouse and this long skirt. So there's this like the way she talks to people, and there's just like it's just more and I think it's also something in Kano's performance, but even there's just something about her performance that even though she's not coming off as like sexually aggressive, she's not dressed in like revealing clothes, there is something that is very appealing about her in it that is just suggestive enough to give you this context you need.
I think it also kind of goes back to this thing that like I mentioned in that initial scene where she gets introduced in Sesame House, with the manager, because he's also the first one out of that group to like absolutely lose his mind, is just like this projection onto her. Like I'm almost reading that they project what they want her to be, and when they don't get that, they like kind of collapse into jealousy and the violence that like occurs afterwards, because like they want her, but they also hate her. The eventual thing that happens to Tomie every single time is a man chops her head off. And it's that kind of, it's like that desire, but also like that hatred that's like, that juxtaposition that's like coming into play there. And I feel like there's this thing where it's like she's an unlikable character. She's supposedly, like in the manga, described as like very beautiful. Women want to be her but dislike her because she's a horrible person, or monster. And men want to sleep with her, but also she's horrible. Like, when she throws nail polish remover in Yamamoto's face, and then calls him ugly, even though he's been carrying around her dismembered head and caring for her as she regrows her body. Um, you know, and it just like it just spirals. It's just spirals for these guys because of how they're like projecting an image onto her that she's just not, if you understand what I mean.
No, it's and I've got some stuff that I pulled that I want to read from, which is more focused on the original manga, but I think it also applies to what you're saying, of just about the the inherent misogyny of the patriarchal society, which is something that is being criticized in especially in the manga. I think it's a much more subtle critique here in the movie, but it's definitely there to some extent. Especially, you know, I thought it was interesting just seeing how Dr. Hosono, the psychiatrist, how she's acting with Harada when he first comes into her office. And it's just like there's a she's just very silent the whole time, and almost like she's kind of like not like outwardly hostile, but there's like you can feel like some like hostility that she has towards him. And I thought that was very interesting because he's typically in this kind of situation, right? The detective is going to be the one who's going to be like in a position of authority here. But it really felt like Hosono was the one who was in the position of authority over him. And he's just saying, and even when he says like, oh, you know, a lot of people don't like detectives and it's because we smoke so much. And she's just, and like the first thing she says to him is like, are you sure that's the reason? And just like,
Yeah. Oh, what I thought was like also maybe an interesting read, and this is just because I'm reading a book by Soji Shimada at the moment, the mystery writer. And he kind of like comments on like Japanese nationalism and Japanese society at the time, and like evolving attitudes for like the modern women, or the modern woman in like 1980s Japan. And what I kind of also read from that scene is like there's this gender dynamic going on where yes, you've got this detective who should be in this position of authority, but he's kind of like faced with this modern woman. She's a doctor. She owns her own practice, I assume. And she smokes, you know, like there's when she asks for the cigarette, he kind of like hesitates. He doesn't know what to do. And then he's just like, oh yeah, you know, it's like he's like you say, he should be in that position of authority, you would think, not just because of the patriarchal society that they exist in, but because of his actual job, you know, where he is a police officer enforcing the law. But he's like, he almost doesn't know how to act, you know, and he's even more kind of like put off by the fact that she is hostile to him, which is also like probably something that he is not expecting from, you know, someone who maybe he would expect to be a bit more gentle and subservient.
right.
She's just like
Yeah.
sat there with her leg crossed, her body language is like turned away from him. And yeah, and she comes across as the person who actually holds the reins of that entire conversation. And I actually think that Asano, who's played by Yoriko Doguichi, probably absolutely mangled that name, but I think she was like really phenomenal in Tomie. And also she was in Cure.
Yes, yeah, she
She's the
was.
doctor in Cure, which is the most, her bit in Cure is one of the most horrifying bits of that film as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. She was also in Love Exposure too, which I have not seen, but it's one of those movies that's on my list. But yeah, that's all very well said. And also going back to the sexuality thing, especially it's interesting too when you compare, you know, kind of like the three main women we see here, right? So obviously we have Tomie, we have Tsukiko, and I'm talking young women. I'm going to leave the doctor out of this. But then you also have Tomie's friend who is sleeping with her boyfriend. When he's sleeping with Yuichi. And the thing that I found interesting is that her friend, whose name I cannot remember right now,
I think it's Kaori.
It might be Kaori. I wasn't sure if that was her or if that was the other friend who dies, but
Oh
no, yeah, I
yeah.
think you're right. Because I think that one was Kazumi, I think. But
Oh yes, that no, you're right.
okay,
Yeah, Kaori and Kazumi. Kazumi's the one who
yeah,
dies and gets found by the dog.
yes, yeah. So what I thought was interesting about because Kaori is the one who's dressed like the most revealing out of all the women in this, right? She's the first time we see her, she's wearing kind of like this top which has bare shoulders, which apparently is at least it used to be kind of a big deal in Japan, like when women would have bare shoulders. I had a friend who in some parts and back in the early 2000, the late aughts, or the early, yeah, the late aughts, right around 2000, 2009, 2010. Friend of mine, she was wearing a top and she had her shoulders bare, and she always had like old Japanese women coming up to her and being like, "Samui desu ne?" Like, aren't you cold? and because the whole idea is like, like you don't show your shoulders, you have to cover those up. But meanwhile, don't ask me why, but the shortest skirts are totally acceptable. So, but so I thought that was interesting that you had her in the much more revealing situations. She's the only one who gets a nude scene at all, right? There's the scene after she had sleep with Yuichi where she's just wearing her underwear and she's topless. And then we have Tsukiko, who is, she's never quite like dressed revealing, but she is often wearing like tank tops or things like that. And always like long pants, except for one scene where we see her wearing just a t-shirt at home. And then you have Tomie, who is always, like I said, dressed in this very conservative manner with the long sleeve white blouse and the long skirt. So I thought that was an interesting visual aspect to sort of like contrast the three, because especially because as we talked about, like Tomie is supposedly the one who is the most sexually who has the strongest sexuality out of all of them, the most sexually aggressive out of all of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's so interesting about that is like, whilst we were discussing earlier that Tomie, out of like, I guess, the vengeful ghost girls, I know that Tomie is not necessarily a ghost but some kind of like creature, but like she has the most personality because of in this film, at least, because I know that different actresses play Tomie in different films, but in this film at least, Mio Kano's like amazing performance. But also in, I guess, like, because we don't see her face for most of it, you just have this kind of like soft voice when she does speak. It's kind of very like childlike and innocent, and yes, like you say, like she's always covered up. She almost like doesn't have a personality other than like kind of cute girl, or what we would think would be a cute girl, while all these other women have specific personality traits. They have different outfits, they wear different things, they do different things, they have different hobbies. They're both into photography, but Kaori doesn't really know whether she wants to like pursue it. She's got talent, but like she's not really interested in it. There's that scene after like she sleeps with Yuichi where they're talking about what they're going to do next. Like he's like, if my band fails, like I don't know, I'll get a job, I'll be a chef. And he's like, what will you do? And she's like, I don't know. Like but you have that discussion with all those people, and I just think like visually, through the fact that they're doing different things, they're wearing different clothes, like it goes in direct contrast to Tomie, which is supposed to, in my opinion, like represent something about womanhood, at least through the framing of what these men, because she's always killed by a man. Well, except for the end where she's blown up by Tsukiko, but like the idea that she doesn't have these individual what am I trying to say here? She's not represented as like a visual individual in the same way as the other women in the film are, is effectively what I was trying to say.
Now, one of the other things I wanted to talk about is, like I said, there's some analysis that I had found, and this comes from the Wikipedia page on the Tomie manga, and some interesting stuff that I wanted to quote here. So this is under analysis and themes. This is the subtitle here is Gendered Violence and the Monstrous Feminine. And it says here, the central cycle of Tomie, consisting of seduction, male obsession, and brutal murder, invokes what scholar Tosha R. Taylor I hope I pronounced that name right, describes as popular discourses of such violence where blame is placed on the female victim. Men in the narrative frequently justify killing and dismembering Tomie as an inevitable expression of love. A framing Taylor notes complicates victim-villain dichotomies. While Tomie embodies the monstrous feminine, a concept Barbara Creed links to male fears, her graphic deaths often visually suggest sexual assault. And there is one Isabel Cristina Pinedo compared a display of her violated body in horror as like the money shot in porn. And Taylor said that Tomie's imagery, like her gang dismemberment in the first story, bears a visual similarity to gang rape, exposing the horror of misogynistic violence rather than glorifying it. And also interesting is that Tomie was serialized in Monthly Halloween, which was a horror magazine targeted specifically at young women. Taylor notes that Tomie embodies pressures specific to girlhood, intense social competition, the threat of male violence, and precarious identity. Her bullying of other girls and terror of being replaced by her copies reflect anxieties about young women's identities in a patriarchal society. The female focalizers in stories like Photo experience Tomie as a haunting presence, aligning the reader with female vulnerability. So all of that I thought was really interesting, and it made me want to go and check out the manga, because what I thought was just going to be like, kind of like a simple horror manga. It seems like it's got a lot more layers to it than what I initially assumed.
I watched a interview with Mami Nakamura, and she talks about like the fact that she wasn't really into horror movies, but she had worked with Miyu Kano on like on a drama beforehand, so she had always wanted to work with her on a film. And and when she was offered this, she was like, oh, I'm not really into horror. But then she read the manga and she was like, this was written by a man. She like couldn't believe it. She was like, this captures like the female experience in a way that she hadn't seen on paper before, and that's what attracted her to the project and wanting to do the project and help portray these characters, because she thought it was important to try and like bring more attention to the themes and the subtext that Tomie talks about, and I guess most importantly is all the things that you've talked about, and it is the violence against women and the continual dismemberment of Tomie, and she replicates, comes back, and it happens again and it happens again. I mean, the detective says like first traces of Tomie were from the Meiji period. It's like been going on for that long.
Yeah, I think that's telling, the fact that it started around Japan's supposed modernization, when Japan still hasn't modernized much in terms of gender dynamics. So I think that's a very telling aspect of it. It's kind of surprising that Nakamura had that perspective, because I was just after you said that, I thought I'd take a look at her Wikipedia page. So she works as a therapist now, but a few years back, she tried to run for politics, but she ran under the right-wing Sanseito party, which is very anti-woman. So I have no idea what's going on there.
Wild. I mean, that interview that I watched was from 2024, so not even that long ago.
No, that was after her. That was after she lost the election. Maybe that's why. Maybe she left the party short after. Yeah. So I don't know. It's wild.
Change of heart.
Yeah, because
or something more cynical.
Because one of their policies is that women have too much power. So.
Which is kind of absolutely the opposite of I guess the message of Tomie, because
exactly
Tomie, whilst she is portrayed as someone who has all this power, I mean, she's destined to constantly die in horrific ways, and Tsukiko, throughout the narrative, she can't remember her past, and she and her mother doesn't inform her about what happened in her past, and it's portrayed as a kindness, but it's removing autonomy from her, and obviously the other acts of violence that we see enacted upon women. What I also think is I guess interesting is that, especially with the male characters, you only ever see the aftermath. And obviously with Tomie, you see, it's not explicit, but you see them hacking away and then the head being held up, it's I said it wasn't explicit, but it's much more explicit than the violence that we see enacted on the men. That's just an aside. It just popped into my head, but
Well, also, and I, what you were saying too, and going back to the Meiji thing is, I'm kind of wondering if maybe this idea is like Tomie is kind of a reflection of the misogyny of the patriarchy. So as long as that patriarchal society continues to exist, Tomie keeps being reborn, and she's reflecting all the fears of that misogynists have about women, right? Sexual aggression, domineering, dangerous. They're going to control men with their sexuality, right? These are all stuff that misogynists claim is why they have to control women. And so she keeps, and also she's turning other women against each other, right? She's constant, at least more in the manga than in the movies. In the movies, she's apparently got a much more, she has much different relationships with women than she does in the manga. But in the manga, she's very, she's often, attacking other women, bullying other women, like almost exclusively. So yeah, that's an interesting aspect of it, true. And it makes me want to watch the rest of the series and to dive in the manga, which, before I talk about the legacy of this, is there anything else you wanted to mention about this movie that we haven't talked about so far?
I guess the only thing, and it popped into my head when we were talking about like the clothing that the characters were wearing, but there is one scene where Tsukiko is wearing less clothing, and it's where she wants to take a photograph with Yuichi, right? And she has the teddy bear. And
oh, that's right. And she's yeah.
But the reason why it popped into my head was like a couple of things. But it was one was she asked, like, she's setting up the photograph and she's waiting, and like, he's like trying to come on to her, and he's like, I'm getting a hard on and all this other kind of stuff. And then she asks him, like, you wouldn't ever betray me, would you? And he's like, huh? And she immediately takes the photograph, like, to get his reaction. And it's like, because there's so much photography throughout Tomie, and like when Yuichi makes her spaghetti, she takes photos of the spaghetti. There's that scene that I just mentioned where she takes a picture of basically him kind of revealing his infidelity, like, and the photograph being truth. And then also the fact that the situation that Tsukiko can't remember, where Tomie gets beheaded by her boyfriend at that time when she was at school, she had like distributed photographs of Tomie that said like monster girl, on it. And also there's that scene with where the water is dripping and then it turns to blood, and then it turns out that it's like a development bath, for the photograph, and the photograph of Tomie like rises up. But just jumping off that point about like the photograph kind of revealing the truth of Yuichi's infidelity, whether she understood that's what it was or not, there's just this kind of, I think, idea of, Tsukiko trying to like through photography kind of like control an image of life, and maybe I'm projecting onto that because that's how we use photography now, like Instagram, all that kind of stuff where everything is like really curated. But you see a little bit of that, I think, with Tsukiko. And I think what it kind of goes to kind of like, I guess, try and say is like the pressure, especially on women, to appear a certain way within society, and to be an incredibly like curated individual. And because I guess that's what I now associate with photography because of the social media age. So like I said, I might be projecting, but because of all the wider themes that we've been discussing here today, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a little bit of something like that in there, the idea of using photography to control her image, but also to control Tomie's image in when she distributed the photographs of her, which eventually led to the death.
Yeah, you know what? I think if this movie had been made in this era instead, I think the photography stuff would have come across as a lot more. I think that would have been a very strong theme that was obviously intended in that way, because I was thinking too, like when she's taking pictures of the food and stuff that he made her, and that feels like a very, social media thing to do, right? And the idea of
And
like
it was
sharing the picture
98.
around, right? It was 1998, exactly. Or sharing the picture around, right? Today it would have been, not developing the picture and handing it out to people, but it would have been like, showing it on TikTok or something like that, or posting up on Instagram, or just sending it through people on like chain text and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. Another interesting thing too about that photograph scene when she confronts Yuichi is because she is that's the scene where she is the most undressed we see her in. That's also a scene where she has to make herself very vulnerable in that scene to get him to reveal his infidelity too, is very interesting too, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of like something I thought on my most recent rewatch, because I rewatched it before coming into this conversation, was I was just like, all these guys are like pure pieces of shit. Like, I mean, they also, once again, like Tomie, don't deserve what happens to them. Like I jump every single time it cuts to the guy with the umbrella, like through his mouth. That's a horrific piece of gore. But they're all like, you know, they're all pretty horrible men. The fact that she has to get into that state of undress to be able to kind of like almost coerce him into being somewhat honest, even though it's because she takes him by surprise, or the fact that the her like landlord at the beginning of the film is tells her to lock the door, there's a lot of weirdos out there, and then he kind of like stops and like stares at her as she like goes in. It's kind of like a little bit like ooh, a little bit voyeuristic, and then obviously ultimately he's the guy who tries to like drown her, and I think like he's the guy who kills Cowdy in the end. um and then obviously the owner, the manager of Sesame House, who I've talked about incessantly, is like the creepy, the stereotypically creepy guy.
Yeah, I mean, like just right off the bat, like saying like, well, of course we don't allow any, employees to date each other, and he's saying like just like the creepiest way possible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and yet, like the only semi decent guy is the detective, and that's just more out of default as opposed to anything he actually does.
But even there's this one bit like, and I kind of only really clocked it on this last viewing, but like he says like, oh, I'm not necessarily interested in solving this case because there won't be any evidence. I just want to see her.
Yes, that's true. I did. I forgot about that part. All right. So before we wanted to wrap things up, I did want to talk a little bit about the legacy here. So obviously there have been a number of films on this. So there's Tomie Another Face in 1999, Tomie Replay in 2000, Rebirth in 2001, Forbidden Fruit in 2002, Beginning in 2005, Revenge also in 2005, Tomie versus Tomie in 2007, and the last one was Tomie Unlimited in 2011. Now you said you've only seen this first movie, right?
Yeah, I've seen this first movie, and I've seen it about 4 times. I am interested in watching the rest of the Tomie films. I just haven't access. It goes back to that accessibility thing, you know?
Yeah, I've managed to get a hand on most of them, I think. Let me just do a quick check and see which ones I do actually have. But I don't think I've managed to get all of them. Now, I do know that there is one of these which was actually kind of a prequel to the original one. I'm trying to see which one it was here. Yeah, so Tomie Replay was, oh no, sorry, Tomie Beginning was released as a prequel, which is adapted faithfully from the original manga, and that ends where this Tomie begins. So if you want one that's close to like the original manga, apparently Tomie beginning is that one. And the ones I do have, just getting my Plex server up here, is, I think I listed them here on. Yeah, so I have Another Face, I have Replay, Rebirth, and Forbidden Fruit. So I only have 5 plus the original. So I only have 5 of them. So I'm missing a few. I'm not sure what the reception is of all of them together. So I don't know how well this series has held up over the course of it. However, Junji Ito, he has expressed his support for the films. He personally chose Miho Kono for the role. He often attends the premieres. So he's always been very supportive of him, it looks like.
I also heard a story that he actually told Miho Kano to draw the little birthmark underneath her eye. I don't know where I heard that from. That's just in my head somewhere.
Okay. All right. So I think that's a good note to end on. Adrian, thanks so much for coming on. And why don't you tell people where they can find you?
I'm on Instagram at Adrian Abbott. That's ABBOTT. And you can also find Another Motion Picture Company on Instagram for the same at the same handle. And also, if you want to look at what we're up to, Another Motion Picture Company let me just check. I can never remember if it's .com. Yeah, it is .com. And you can, well, because sometimes .co.uk, but nah, this is just .com. And you can kind of see the work that we have been putting out. We've only got a couple of things live because I think 4 things are still on the festival run. But eventually, as that completes, they'll all get uploaded online. And then onto the bigger one, which we're just starting work on now, but it's very kind of inspired by like fair game mystery novels from Japan in like the 80s and early 90s, especially like the Bizarre House Mysteries novel series, which I think are just so much fun, basically. And we're taking a lot of inspiration for that for what we hope to be our feature, but once again, it's funding.
Yeah. All right. Very cool. All right. Well, people can check that out in the show notes. We'll have links to all that stuff there. As for us, japanonfilm.com is the website, and japanonfilm.com on Blue Sky, and Japan on Film on everything else, though Blue Sky is mostly where you can find me these days. Although don't forget, we also have the Discord server, the Film Stories Discord server. You can find a link to join that in the show notes as well. We have a channel specifically for Japan on Film, so pop on in, ask some questions. It's not the most active channel on the Discord, but if you post anything in there, I will come in and, comment on occasion. So I will definitely be checking in from time to time on there. And also, this is the end of the season. Thanks so much for listening to season 14 of Japan on Film. As usual, we are going to be taking a hiatus, and we'll be coming back in sometime in the near future with another batch of episodes, another batch of guests, and more Japanese movies to talk about. If you want to keep in touch until then, you can check out the socials or also my website, percivalconstantine.com, or you can also find me on my Substack, pulpcorner.substack.com. Guys, thanks so much for listening, and I will see you in season 15.
The Japan on Film podcast is produced by me, Perry Constantine, in conjunction with the Film Stories Podcast Network. Visit japanonfilm.com for show notes, episodes, and information about being a guest yourself. You can also reach out to me on the website's contact form if you have questions or comments about Japanese movies or the show itself. The show is at Japan on Film on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, so please be sure to follow us. If you'd like to support the show, you can donate on japanonfilm.com, purchase from our advertisers, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Film Stories Podcast Network Discord from the link in the show notes to connect with me and many other cinema fans and podcasters.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.